It's an open secret now that consuming large amounts of processed foods and refined carbohydrates in general leads to a whole host of health problems. It's not controversial. Even the very mainstream health authorities agree with us on that much. The low carb to zero carb broader communities would have a different definition of what constitutes excess carbohydrate consumption than mainstream authorities. And even amongst ourselves, we tend to disagree. For example, if you're a keto person watching a carnivore channel like this, then you might object to the notion that carb consumption should be kept to as close to 0 grams of carbohydrates per day as possible, which is the standard carnivore practice. And I won't go into that debate here. It's not really worth debating. Suffice it to say, though, that while there is near universal agreement on the dangers of refined carbohydrates, the same people who make those claims in the mainstream are also often the same ones pushing plant-based diets on people, especially that new grotesque plant-based meat. And they either push that messaging with incessant rhetoric and just constant messaging pressure, or worse, they use public policy actions to do it. You only have to look at the American program WIC, it's Women, Infants, and Children. It's a federal program to assist young mothers who need financial help to feed their children. You only have to look at that program to see it in action. If you're not familiar with it, it's well, let's just say it's a program that gives mothers plenty of formula, and which is fine, but also refined carbohydrates of the worst kinds in large amounts to feed to young children. It's refined carbs. We're talking breakfast cereal and breads and things like that. This stuff is setting people up for disaster from the literal get-go of their lives. But it gets better. The official line that comes from our nutrition authorities are that seed oils are good, that they're good for you, that they're healthiest things in the world you could be eating. Now, saturated fats are bad. And we know that that's nonsense. We know it's nonsense to the point where some actual official outlets are now re-examining the question about saturated fats. But that's a good thing. The major push lately, though, has been to push plant-based meat alternatives, which are made with refined carbohydrates, if in small amounts, and largely nutritionally vapid and empty sources of protein compared to their natural, actually meat alternatives. These things contain seed oils that are the cause of many modern health woes. And the authorities, as well as the private sector, are meeting together to create conditions that will make this the only viable source of protein. Not because of natural reasons, but because they cause the problems that are leading to people only being able to buy this stuff. A lot of it's by design. They've said as much themselves. What are the effects of more processed foods being consumed by the population going to be? Bigger profits for companies that will have to make products to take care of the health consequences of eating this processed junk. Let me give you an example. The United States, I saw the study from 2018, blew my mind. It said, would you really factor in the physical condition of Americans compared to people who eat what they consider to be, what the researchers consider to be an ideal diet, which is very Mediterranean, not quite plant-based, but the next best thing. Think kind of blue zones kind of thing. When you take the average American, compare it to that, to people in those regions of the world, guess what you get? An obesity rate of 88% in the United States of America, with only 5% of the people who are healthy, and the rest all have other conditions that undermine their health. That's staggering, but it's not also all that unbelievable if you really think about it. That's the first consequence of this processed food thing. When you go to the grocery store and just casually pay attention to what other people are buying, carts full of processed foods. We in the carnivore world are the nichest of niche markets. We go to 3 parts of the grocery store to get our food. Go to the meat aisle, we go to the dairy section, and then we go get our eggs. And that's it. That's all we get, really, unless you're shopping for other people. The first consequence, and the most obvious one that people talk about, are the health consequences of eating processed foods. But it's a bigger one. The centralization of your food, the centralizing of control of your food into fewer and fewer hands. Think about it this way. Right now, the American food industry is fairly decentralized. It's decentralized over tens of thousands of farms and tens of thousands of processing centers across the country. There are so many food processing centers in the country that in reality, that it's just highly decentralized other than maybe through the contracting process. While there are certainly other centralizing factors into it, aside from contracting through where it's sold, the centralizing factors include seed production, fertilizer production, farm equipment manufacture, logistics. Largely, the American food system, aside from those things, is pretty decentralized. But you now have one man buying up tens of millions of acres of farmland while advocating for replacing beef with either cloned beef or worse, with plant-based alternatives, while using his considerable influence to get public policy made to get the population to switch over to glorified human dog food called plant-based meat. For example, we're seeing this now out of the policy area. The US Navy just announced that 2 of its forward bases are switching to plant-based meats like Beyond Burgers and Gardein because of cost and supply chain issues. This is in their 2023 defense budget. I hope you watching this aren't one of those on bases, those forward bases, because right now they're doing 2 forward bases, because if you are, you're probably going to be visiting the infirmary more often than before. This stuff isn't really meant for human consumption in the long term. But what is the end result of this centralizing of the food system in this way? More power in the hands of very few who don't have our best interests at heart. Look at the things these people advocate. They're not interested in our well-being. They are interested in their own well-being. Look, if you consume processed foods in too high an amount, they will make you sick. That's not controversial. Again, everyone agrees on that. So why are they pushing processed foods like this as a solution to all of our problems? It isn't for good reasons. When they say plant-based foods, they want you to think of salads and garden burgers and whatever people make eggplants with and other things people think are healthy. They don't want you thinking of this. That's a real plant-based food. It's fake food, barely suitable for human consumption in general, and then only in an emergency. I'm going to ask you this question here. If you were stuck in your house during a historic blizzard, and you had power in this, so you had the ability to cook and preserve food, but no ability to drive anywhere for several weeks straight, and you were down to some old but still safe canned, we'll say Chef Boyardee ravioli, beef ravioli, as only one of 2 options that you have, and the other is some shelf-stable plant-based superfood that maybe you were gifted by a well-meaning friend, and this stuff claimed to be complete nutrition, but it was still as highly processed as the Chef Boyardee. Which would you go for? I think we all know the answer to that, in which of the 2 junk foods you would be going for. Both are going to be nutritionally equivalent anyway. Both contain soy. Only one contains meat. And if you need proof of that, just go watch my recent vegan eggs video. Vegan eggs are junk food and barely fit for human consumption outside of an emergency. They have none of the nutrition of an egg. They don't come close to competing with eggs for nutrition. For some reason, they're still being pushed by people as a viable alternative to eggs. And of course, the really bizarre question, why do vegans want fake eggs? Why do they want fake meat products anyway? That's why, like, of the vegans, I tend to respect the raw food or whole food vegans the most, because they're not going to be eating garden burgers or Beyond Burgers or Impossible Burgers and using vegan eggs. They're not going for that because they're going for whole foods. Things that, you know, they shop on the outside of the stores like we do, except they tend to stick to a very few places in the store. I tend to respect them more. Now, one way you can fight back against all this nonsense is to get to know your local rancher to the best of your ability. When you can afford it, because I know not everybody can, buy beef from them directly, or eggs or pork or lamb or whatever animal product they sell. Get to know them. Develop a direct relationship with them. If nothing bad happens because of this organized push to eating fake foods or the economic conditions out there right now and the weird forecasts about shortages later in the year, if none of that comes to pass, then fantastic. I'm quite happy. You'll still be ahead of everyone else, though, because you'll have strengthened your community and really emphasized that tribe part of carnivore tribe, a term you see people throw around. But if things do get so bad as some are projecting, getting to know your local sources of food will become an important strategy to weathering the storm caused by the idiots who run the world and think they know better than everyone else. This drive to pressure you to eat fake meat is just one way they have of trying to get you to give them more power and more money. They don't have your best interests at heart. If they did, they'd be out there promoting carb-restricted diets of various kinds instead of pushing people to adopt vegetarian and vegan diets. And that's the sad truth. I'm curious what your opinion on this is. What do you think the reason is to get that there is such a huge push for getting people to eat plant-based foods and especially plant-based meat? Is it just profit motive? I know some say that it's pretty much only profit motive.
But some of these people say some pretty weird things aside from money that have nothing to do with money. So I'm curious what you think about this. So let me know in the comments what you think the real reason behind everything is, and like and subscribe if you haven't. It really does help new channels like this grow. And as always, thanks for watching today.